Hello and welcome to BIOS Builders. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Seemay Chou, co-founder and CEO of Arcadia Science, to the show. Seemay, thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
To help host this episode, I'm joined by special guest host and previous BIOS contributor, Becky Ferderhert, investment partner at Andreessen Horowitz.
Thanks, Chris.
Glad to have you here. Before we kick things off, Seemay, can you share a brief personal introduction with us today?
Sure. Yeah. My background is in the life sciences. So actually, Becky and I trained together in grad school in molecular bio. And then much of my career has been in academia, where I ended up as an assistant professor at UCSF, and then recently spun out a new experimental science company called Arcadia Science, where we're really thinking about how to kind of set up our science towards like entrepreneurial translational means.
Maybe Becky as well, I can ask before we dive a little bit deeper on Arcadia, if you wanted to offer a brief introduction on yourself.
Sure. I've had the pleasure of getting to be on BIOS a couple times before, so I won't give much of an introduction here, but I'm an investor at Andreessen Horowitz, focused on early stage biotech companies. And as Seemay said, we had the pleasure of going to graduate school together at Berkeley and have had the long-term pleasure of watching each other's careers grow and develop over time.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Seemay. As we dive back in, Seemay, could you provide an introduction to Arcadia for us? You offered a brief glimpse, but we'd love to hear a little bit more to set the context for the episode.
Yeah, I co-founded Arcadia about 2 years ago, and the idea was to fill what I felt like was a gap in both science and industry, to think about how we really set up like an entire company or institute, whatever noun you want to call it, that is really geared towards setting up research infrastructure that builds towards companies, so seeding startups that we're spinning out of Arcadia. And so we have sort of like very specific science interests of our own around sort of exploring biology and the way we want to do it. But at the end of the day, in terms of the model, we're really a company creation studio that's trying to reach more upstream into the process to kind of like build out all the steps leading up to that pre-idea.
Thank you for that, Seemay. So as you mentioned, in 2021, you helped co-found Arcadia with this vision to create a new ecosystem institute for scientific innovation and to help apply that evolutionary lens to accelerate really purposeful discovery of innovation in bio. And so now you're 2 years into building Arcadia. Can you tell us a bit more how it's evolved over these last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely evolved a lot. So part of our charge when we started was to try and really think about how we experiment with a different way of doing this, both in terms of the kind of science we wanted to do, which you alluded to, is really thinking about, how we approach evolutionary biology and really start to incorporate like a broader range of organisms into research. And then the second part of that was kind of a business goal, which was to think about, everybody talks about this like valley of death between sort of academia and industry. And there is a type of science that is in between that, where you're sort of intentionally taking a discovery to market. And it's a very different kind of science than we've been trained to do in academia. And it's a different kind of science that is traditionally supported in more traditional like venture-backed companies. And so we were trying to kind of figure out how we operated in the middle there. And so the way it's changed, on both those fronts, I would say scientifically, our thinking about this problem has just gotten a little more sophisticated. When we started, it kind of made sense the way we started, but looking back, it was kind of naive of like, oh, we're just going to like pick a few new organisms to really do this giant thing with. This giant thing being that every time, in science, we kind of like look under a new rock of a new organism, usually something cool is discovered. And often some of the most successful commercial moments have come from these serendipitous discoveries. But the idea that you're going to like randomly choose, 5 more organisms, and those are going to be the winning golden ticket, is just kind of silly. That's actually like a very narrow way of thinking about it. And so we kind of started that way, though, because that's how we were used to thinking about the problem. We brought in people coming from different disciplines, organized around different like types of organisms, microbiology, other types of sort of taxa. And then we realized that like we couldn't come to any decision on this. Like there was no way to rationally decide that 5 organisms were going to be the ones. And so we kind of grappled with that for a while, tried a bunch of things, weren't satisfied with it. And the huge jump for us has been moving from, oh, which organisms are we going to choose, to seeing how we choose organisms is the central question of Arcadia, that actually no one's really figured this out. Like, how do you sort of rationally, systematically predict where across the tree of life you should look if you're interested in drug delivery into the brain, or if you're interested in itch, as an example, something we are working on. And I think, like, with all the computational tools and advances in AI right now, there's a real moment that we can like grab onto. Like, we want to be the ones to figure out how you pick organisms. That is kind of like our central goal. And then the second part of it is, okay, like, as y'all know, starting a company doesn't just happen. This is not a thing you just fall into. You actually have to be extremely deliberate about that process, and you have to bring in the right people who are like 100% committed to doing that. So in the process of trying to like set up our science that would feed into our startups, we realized like there's a lot that we don't need to reinvent here. There's like a lot we can learn from kind of existing venture creation studios, how you operationalize it. And some of the lessons that I think you all know too is like, you have to find the people who are like the founders, who are invested in the idea, willing to take it forward, willing to take it 100%. And so we've kind of built like a company creation studio around that idea, trying to start all the way from the scientists that we bring in to do the research. We are trying to recruit the ones that want that final outcome and are willing to put their entire career on the line to do that. And so we're really sort of pushing for more of this like venture creation model, but coupling that with a pretty big research infrastructure that feeds into that.
So, Seemay, I have one question, which is, if we go back to kind of the founding of Arcadia and how it's evolved over time, one of the things that you're in a very unique position is around your financing. So Arcadia was funded by two private investors who, at least at face value, look very different from typical LPs. I'm curious, as you look back over the last 2 years, do you think that this has fundamentally led to different company building tactics? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and this is not to take away from the people involved in Arcadia, they are key, but just like in evolution, leading up to any Cambrian explosion, there has to be a fundamental change in the conditions, right? And that was like the fundamental change in our conditions that allows us to do something different. It's different from academia in that, there's a different goal in mind. Like, we're not trying to, our endpoint is not sort of like journal articles and other things that are knowledge outputs, but startups. And then in terms of like what could potentiate that is the fact that we have a $500 million investment upfront, and investors that are not just interested in the like final return on investment, but willing to go to like breaking even on this if we can produce a different model that would be appealing to investors that are like a combination of both mission-minded and goal-oriented. And so it's, Jed and Sam are investors. They originally entertained the idea of Arcadia as sort of a nonprofit institute. And so the fact that they went from there to this means that they still are like very mission oriented. And so that like difference in financial expectations is huge. We can take different types of risks. We can build different types of companies over different timelines. And so that's why we're setting up so much research infrastructure and can go so upstream that most places can't really afford to do that. So we definitely are trying not to take that for granted and make sure that is part of our like competitive differentiation. If we're ever doing something that is like easy to compete against, like, we're not doing it the right way,
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such an opportunity to pursue, as you said, science in a way that is really unique from both traditional academia and traditional industry. I'd be curious actually to dig in a little bit more in that area.
Sure.
What do you think, what are those opportunities that are unique to Arcadia amongst the other, kind of competitors out there we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the opportunities that are available to us is like, you can think about like timelines, like there's probably a lot of interesting ideas that you could pursue if you were funded to start a year or two before everybody else, where you could actually like de-risk the ideas, take a bunch of shots on goal, not have to worry about like partnerships with universities and all these like mixed incentives to do that. But like, if you could actually take the shortest line to like de-risk something, it would just allow you to like try a lot of things that you might not normally do, like higher risk things that like after a year of experimentation, you could say like go or no go on it. But you couldn't do that otherwise. I think it also allows us to go after the types of opportunities that just like may never be the type of like unicorn returns that other investors might be interested in, such as things that could be maybe like a solid like 2x return. And we can see that coming, right? And it's like up for grabs, but like most LPs are not really interested in something like that. And so I think those are like two examples of things we can really go after. And then I think the other thing is like, we don't even know the full answer to your question yet, because what we have a chance to do is set up like a pretty rich like pipeline and platform that can like yield brand new ideas that we aren't even thinking about. And a lot of that platform is getting refined by, our advisors, such as you as one of them, Becky, but like helping us to work backwards from like, what are the needs? What are the gaps? And then how do you set up a basic research program that would like get you quickly towards that? So I guess finally, the other thing is like right now, because we're like really trying to promote like a science and scientists driven type of culture, we're able to recruit like pretty awesome talent, some of which is coming from academia, but they're looking for like a different career outcome here. And so I think that also, if you were to contrast that with academia, it's like pretty hard to get that outcome if someone is trying to figure out how to squeeze it into their postdoc while they're trying to do this whole other thing. But when you have people fully invested in this path, it's just a whole different ballgame.
And as you said, so much has changed over the past 2 years that we have no idea what the future will hold and how this will evolve over time, which is part of the exciting part.
It really is. I mean, I couldn't have actually planned it better myself, like when in history to do this, because there's just so much happening that's like making this even more exciting for us.
As we think about some of that excitement, maybe let's shift our focus, at least briefly, and talk a little bit more about Arcadia's not only unique mission, but core competencies. And so Arcadia is, if I'm going to summarize a bit of what you've described, a for-profit startup incubator with your own research platform that leverages evolutionary biology for discovery. As we think about that, can you provide a little bit more context and detail for the audience about what a research platform means at Arcadia? And I know you've touched on this a bit, but what makes your approach different from others in both industry and in academia?
Yeah, so our core competencies are built around like maybe a central thesis that we think that, everyone says biology is technology. And what we mean at Arcadia is that organisms are technology, that every single organism is sort of the culmination of like millions of billions of years of experimental evolution to like get you towards a set of solutions. So inherent in that, there's like really unique solutions that exist in every organism. And so our core competency is basically, what are the tools you would need to like navigate that noisy space to find exactly those things that you're looking for. And so we think about this in a number of ways. And I will say that a lot of our work has become computational in nature. And the starting points certainly are like 90% computational, because there is no like faster way to survey such a broad range of biology. And so a lot of our search tools are like built at like different biological scales. Like one scale that you can think about this question is at the genomic scale. There are patterns across different genomes, and that is like at this moment in time, probably the most common data set we have across the widest range of organisms, and increasingly like lots and lots of sequencing data sets, both genomic and transcriptomic. And so what you're actually looking for, like as an evolutionary biologist, what you're saying is like, I think there are interesting outliers. That's one thing you could say, is that like extreme outliers are an example of extreme innovation. And I'm looking for some outlier, either in this gene family, like you could look across gene families to see like where there's been an explosion of duplication, or like this really weird, like funky outlier sequence based family. And then you can start asking questions about like, are those outliers indicative of something? Like, does that co-occur, like that gene family co-occur with some crazy trait, that might be an indication like they've figured out how to like cross some interesting barrier in the body, like a virus that really is like an outlier in that way. And so a lot of our computational tools are just like looking at these trends across evolution and picking out outliers. There is a whole nother way of thinking about organisms as technology, though, which is literally the other side of that coin, which is organisms as models. And like an example of where this is really helpful is like for disease models, right? There's a lot of diseases for which maybe mice don't work or the existing like model organisms don't work, and you need some proxy to really gain traction on a problem. And so we're starting to think about like, what is the way to find like an ideal model organism for some problem? And in many cases, the problems we're most interested in are disease phenotypes. And so we're looking for the same thing, outliers and shared biology. We're also starting to think about this at other scales, like the protein level. And this is where tools like AlphaFold have been a huge game changer for us. And like now we're able to navigate like a way broader space because of that by predicting structures. Another level at which to think about this is like at features we don't even know how to look for. So we're setting up a whole like imaging pipeline, you know, computational imaging to like search for predictive features that are generative for some phenotype we're interested in. And that's where a lot of more like predictive stuff is happening. More of the ML work is starting to happen at Arcadia.
I'm curious, as you think about building out computational capabilities within Arcadia, how do you think about what to build internally versus what to leverage externally, what to partner on? What computational capabilities really require that internal integration versus what can be leveraged from what exists outside?
Yeah, so this is like why the community, the whole community around us, like exploding in this moment is really exciting because we don't have to do everything. You know, like when we started, it was like, oh, we have all these ideas, you know, everything from like ways to operationalize science, you know, because all of our data are like our gold, right? So when we think about setting up ELNs and our data architecture, all of this stuff, like it's kind of overwhelming to imagine how you're going to build all of these tools to do it correctly. And so we're super excited to see lots of other companies, lots of other innovators in the space, as well as like new experimental science institutes that are like really going after this. I think I just saw something about the new Polymath AI Institute, people thinking about tooling. That's huge for us. We don't need to be the ones to do that. We won't even be the best at it. And so for us, it really comes down to, I think, the core competency that is different from other places is the way we think about evolutionary tools. Like that is kind of our bread and butter, and anything else that we can, you know, patch that together with on the outside, like we don't need to be the ones innovating on all those other things. But that is kind of what we think will be the key for our startups too. You know, like we want to figure out where the shortcuts are through evolution, because we think that that is going to be faster than some of the like, you know, homegrown man-made ideas around how to like reinvent biotechnology.
And actually that makes me think also of, you know, one of the places that I think a lot of investors today are looking for differentiation within the AI and ML world meets biology is people and companies that are able to generate very unique, solid data sets that really give them a moat from the data side. Where are the places that you think Arcadia has a unique advantage for data generation?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the way we're capitalized and our investor expectations are huge, right? Like we actually have the time and the money to do this ourselves. So the way we normally go about it is like, you know, start out with some sort of computational pilot to ask yourself, is there there? Are we convinced that maybe there's something in the biological space that could be an answer to a question we're interested in? Maybe I'll just like pick an example of something that we're not working on so that we have something concrete to talk about. Like, let's say we were interested in finding for like climate science, you know, like a photosynthesis, evidence of some extraordinary photosynthetic capabilities. You know, we might do an initial search of like, when we've seen organisms with this, what are some like examples of genes or gene families or even protein structures that emerge with that we could start searching for more broadly? And like, what do we think would be the principal features of such an organism? And then what would be the like minimum, we could do some synthetic data sets, you know, like what would be the minimum we would need to collect to really convince ourselves of that further and start like deriving some engineering principles out of that. And once we just sort of convince ourselves like there is something there, like we don't have to answer it fully, then we can decide, okay, we might want to spend like $1 million here. Like we might want to generate XYZ data set to actually do this the right way. And we can actually do that, you know, and we can continue to bank away these data sets. And it's okay for us, you know, like if like that particular effort doesn't pan out, but we continue to accumulate like data sets that we can work with. And at this point, like the most helpful data set is probably like genomes. That's like the thing that we can best like stitch together with like publicly available data sets to like do a lot more. We are exploring some like more imaging based approaches that I think if we were to do that, we do also need to figure out how to popularize it within the science community, because the truth is, I don't think that any single company or organization can figure this all out on their own. And so we are going to have to figure out like, what is the scalable method beyond Arcadia? And how do we make sure that's like a popular, useful tool that everyone will like willingly want to use for their own science? And then now you really start building together like data sets that are scalable for what you want to do.
Yeah, it feels like you actually have, again, being kind of in this interesting middle zone, you have maybe a very unique opportunity to be able to leverage partnerships, both on the academic side as well as potentially within industry.
Yeah. And part of, I think that it helps that we're really sharing a lot of our work openly with the community. And I think the other aspect of this that is strategic is like, because we want this to scale beyond Arcadia, we actually need to figure out like the cheapest technologies, right? Like it can't be so expensive that no one outside of Arcadia can do it. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make the tools we make like as cheap as possible so that it can reach to like all corners of the science community and people are motivated to use the same tools to generate similar types of data.
Actually, maybe if we could double click on that for a second, because I know that open science and sharing openly about your building of Arcadia, the science, the data that you're generating, whether it's in the positive direction or maybe even negative results, has been kind of one of the core tenets that has arisen throughout your building of Arcadia. Can you talk a little bit about like the motivation for that and where that stands today?
Yeah. I mean, like big picture, the motivation for that is just progress. I mean, that is like one of the main reasons we started Arcadia. The main reason the investors are involved is we all feel a level of urgency about scientific progress. And so I think that is the top goal, period. And we think that like sharing openly will help that. Of course, we do have to take into account, when we might need to be a little bit protective around stuff because we see a path forward for translating that into some commercial tool. So I've never said that we're 100% open, but we are trying to push the boundaries of how open we can be. And I think that a lot of companies could probably be more open about what they're doing and not sacrifice their sort of commercial goals. But there's a real practical obstacle to this, which is like publishing in a journal takes like an outrageous amount of time. Like no company in their right mind would ever spend their time on that. And I totally get it, And so I think one way we're trying to innovate is like, what's the fastest, most useful way a company could do this that would be both beneficial to progress and not take too much time from a company. And also like, if I were to pitch this to other companies, there's like, maybe more like less altruistic reasons they might want to do this. Like it's been a huge boon to our recruitment. We've been able to clearly signal to the best talent out there, the best scientific talent, like what we work on, and they're coming and finding us. Another is that we get like tons of feedback, so that's actually what you want by releasing this stuff is feedback, not just on the technical rigor of your stuff, but like who's interested in this? Like, are these tools people want to use? Like that's actually our goal, is to be useful. And so some signs of this are actually not even necessarily like who comments on our pubs, but things we track, like who's pull requests off GitHub, who's actually like showing that they're using things, asking for like materials from us and following up on our work. Like that is the real indication that it's useful. And for our like super long-term goals of thinking about how we start generating like navigation tools for biology, making sure that people are using these like small iterations along the way is like the strongest signal we have that our stuff will be useful later and potentially commercializable later too. So I think it's all like win-win in our eyes. And I know it's like taking probably more resources than most companies would want at this stage for us to figure out how to do it. But 100% our goal is to figure out how to scale it cheaply so that other companies will want to do it too. And as you know, so much stuff just sits on the shelves in terms of like ideas that were never followed up on, or like lessons that were learned, like why did this drug fail, or why did this startup go under? Like those are all really valuable for everybody so that we can like move forward a little more quickly. And so yeah, absolutely. A lot of our stuff is like stuff that didn't pan out, and we're really proud of that. And I think like it's an indication also that we truly are operating like pre-idea, because some of the things that we decided not to move forward on, people in academia are asking for materials and methods, strains from us so that they can pick up where we left off, showing that like they're interested in running with those ideas even when we're not, because for us it's like it's a go or no go around like commercial opportunity, you know.
It makes a lot of sense, and really love that collaborative mindset, as well as that emphasis on both technical rigor, but the way it brings, most importantly, in many ways, people on board. And so as we think about those people, Arcadia has two primary technology development teams that seek to address these unmet needs for the broader research community. The translation team, which operates more on a venture studio model, and the discovery team, which is more platform focused. Can you share with us a quick overview on these two tech dev teams and how they interact?
Yeah, so I don't think of the translation team as like a tech dev team, but they're really like our internal customers is the way we think about it. So our internal customers for our discovery platform, they're the first line to figure out like, are these tools useful at all? And are they useful towards taking you closer to like spinning out some sort of a startup? So it really informs the tools that we're building and allows for iteration on that. And I think like historically that's been a challenge for platform companies, is that, you know, in the absence of that really concrete sort of like customer, it's really hard to know if your stuff is working. And so it's a real like close back and forth between those two. But I would say our discovery team does more than that. You know, they're sort of like, okay, what do we think? What are the translational customers within Arcadia telling us that they need to navigate biology? And then there's a level of like, what are they not even telling us, but that like they might want, right? Like you can't actually build at the like edge of something and only respond in reaction to what people are telling you. So there's like about 50% of the work on discovery team is just trying to like, I guess like dream about the future. Like, what do we one day want to do? Like, what does the future look like when someone sits down and thinks about how they want to like query biology? And that's where we started really like, you know, dreaming bigger about, you know, what is like what we kind of call like the page rank for biology look like, you know, like it's not just like a single tool, but it's like building of like a suite of tools that like inform on each other and maybe go back and forth between each other, of that you could say, okay, I'm interested in understanding like why my hair is black. Tell me what to do. And it runs like all these different analyses and helps, just like kind of Google did at some point for us, like point you to here's where you should look and why, the organisms, the scales of the problem, and like some of the outstanding questions in this area. And that's kind of what we're doing in a manual way right now. And so we're trying to like, you know, figure out like what else is needed to actually get there. And that's a much harder thing to do. And that's a much like windier open path. But that's kind of like the way they think about things, is like trying to project into the future, what would be the predictive capacity we're trying to build.
And as we think about that suite of tools, about that predictive capacity, how do the different teams leverage recent computational advances to not only shape your research, but also the business strategies you're pursuing at Arcadia?
Yeah, so totally switched everything up. I mean, in a good way. You know, originally we were thinking about this with a little more like sort of wet lab thinking. Not that we aren't anymore, but it's not our starting point, you know, for the most part. Rather than thinking about like, oh, how are we going to get gene editing to work in like these 3 species or something? We're trying to think about like the process, like the funnel process, like what's the way to like source like the largest range of organisms that you might think is suitable for your problem, and then what's the next easiest, cheapest way to like de-risk those. So as an example, you would say, okay, like I think based on like these principal search things, like I think that these 20 species would be great for photosynthetic sort of outliers. Okay, well, let's throw like the traditional 5 gene editing tools at all of them, and it doesn't even matter like which one they are. Like, will they work in like any of them? And I bet you, based on like statistics, like of like thinking back on, you know, historical research, like you'll probably hit like 5 out of 20. You won't hit 20 out of 20, but for some reason 5 will work and some 5, you know, 15 won't. And that's fine, because like principally you've already decided that any of these could work. So now you take it forward and ask like, what's the next tool I need to build? And so the way we've been thinking about it is less of a like, oh my gosh, we have to make this one species work, but like, how do we build this funnel so that we increase the likelihood, have more shots on goal that like eventually you'll find something that will work. And I think one of the fun things to think about is in the process of this, there's kind of like a meta opportunity, like what I just said about like, we don't care which ones they work in, which ones they don't. But actually, that's like data. One day we might want to go back at that list and ask, like, why did this gene transformation work in these 5 and not these 15? And maybe by that point, we'll have 100 and like 1,000 in this category. And maybe there's actually something really interesting there that we can pull out of that, like extract out like why that was able to get across this barrier. There's probably some even interesting like drug delivery lessons there to be learned. And so, yeah, we're just kind of like thinking about things pretty differently, like more like systematically how we do this with like as little attachment to like one species as possible, which is kind of a weird way to be as a biologist that is like naturally a fanatic of organisms, but you know, like it's more about finding the right one for your problem.
Maybe as we talk about finding the right one for your problem, let's talk about those problems and how Arcadia is really planning to move science forward from basic research towards commercialization. You mentioned earlier that, you know, at Arcadia, you have this really unique opportunity to translate science in a very different way, and that you have the opportunity to both leverage existing strategies that have been developed within other venture creation studios or venture capital or a variety of different strategies for company formation that exist already. But you also have an opportunity to develop approaches that are completely unique to Arcadia and perhaps, you know, leverage the difference in financing and difference in timeline that you have. Could you kind of walk us through how you think about translational strategy at Arcadia?
Yeah, so this is another area where we've sort of tried a bunch of different things. And I'll tell you where we are now. What we've realized is a couple of things that work well and some things that don't work well. So one thing that works really well is having like all of the scientists on our translation team thinking about a single problem area together at once. It was really hard before when people like individuals were sort of like manually picking and choosing like, oh, I want to work on this disease or this or that, you know. It's just like everybody was too isolated. And so what we started doing is something called these like coordinated translation sprints, where we basically decide, okay, for this period of time, let's say, since, you know, I've already shared like one of the things we're interested in is itch. Let's like brainstorm all together, like all the possible ways we think biology has solved itch, all the possible like models, all the possible extreme outliers, like anything we can think of, learn everything about itch together, learn about like companies have tried and failed in this space, talk to investors, talk to like everyone through the whole ecosystem to really understand the problem and where the bottlenecks have been. Then we say, let's brainstorm, like what could any of the scientists do for 1 to 3 months to like really test their like most exciting, crazy idea. And let's like do all of them at once in parallel. And then let's sit down at the end of this period and look at like where we're at. And one, is there anything exciting that anybody is like willing to devote like 6 more months of their lives to? And if so, like, let's rank them. What's the most exciting one? And I think that this has like really created this kind of more like team spirit where, you know, no one's like, I need mine to win. It's just like, we've decided on these like fairly random, to be honest, you know, like science is like, you make guesses. And so these like guesses we made, we're going to try them. And then where are we at? And I think that's like a really just exciting way to do it. I don't know all the ways other venture creation studios do it. But I've just been really excited seeing the scientists like work together in parallel in this way. And then they like talk to each other. They talk to our discovery team to try and like iterate together and brainstorm around this. And they've gotten like really good at just shutting things down too. Like in the beginning, it was kind of hard. We had to like, all right, like, are you sure you want to move forward with this? And now they're just like icing their own projects like pretty relentlessly. And that's really exciting to see. It's just like a whole different mindset. And so that's kind of like operationally how we're doing it right now. And I think that's how we're going to build it out for the like pre-idea stage of this process. And then the idea would be if there's anything useful to do moving forward from there, we would like incubate it for like 6 more months. And then if that went well, like what do you have to do for 6 more months to convince yourself to work on it for another year? And kind of go through like milestones the way you normally would in like pre-seed, seed kind of iterations, but it all stays in-house.
Is the idea that those companies or those, you know, opportunities, projects that you develop within Arcadia would always remain in-house, or is there an idea that at some point you might consider spinning those out to be their own kind of living, breathing external companies? What do you think that might look like?
Yeah, no, we absolutely want to spin them out. So, I mean, I think that's key to the success of the company. Like both, I mean, at some point it does have to become autonomous and really like build out its own idea. Bringing in like outside investors at about the Series A stage is what we're imagining. I think that's going to be really beneficial to the companies. We also want to recruit the kinds of founders who want to lead it. That's not going to happen if we like keep everything in-house. And so we're also thinking about how generous we should be to make sure that like we recruit the type of people who want to lead. They're not going to want to do that if you give them just like a really crappy deal, right? So, I mean, the thing we always say internally, which I feel like is a bit of like trauma informed from dealing with universities, is like a giant piece of a tiny pie means nothing. Like a smaller piece of a giant pie means everything, right? So like however we can like help enable these people that are going to like actually lead and do a good job with it is better. So we imagine incubating all the way until about the Series A stage. By that point, if they're not competitive with other companies at that stage, then we haven't done a good job, you know. So hopefully at that point, it'll be of interest to outside investors.
One other related question that I have, I think is interesting, is I've seen recently some firms who are more traditional kind of venture creation studios also start to consider doing some outside investing or collaborating on technologies and science that come from external innovation. Is that something that Arcadia has thought about? Are there opportunities to bring in externally sourced ideas or externally generated ideas?
I mean, there's definitely the possibility of that in the future. I mean, at this moment in time, the only downside of that is like the more people we bring in, the more mixed incentives we have, and the harder it is for us to take risks the way we want to take them. And so right now we're trying to do things like fully in-house, but I mean, I think that might change. I mean, one of the advantages of Arcadia is we can be nimble about this stuff. So we'll just like go wherever the opportunities lead us. Right now, we're not doing it though.
I was curious to double click a little bit more, Seemay, on what you'd said around incubating in-house and ensuring leadership development. And especially as we think about the lengthy life cycle of company building, especially sometimes at this intersection of technology and biology. And as you bring people together, it feels like leadership training, culture, company building are so important. And so you touched on this a bit, but I would love to really maybe dive one layer deeper and just ask directly, how do you think about the process of bringing together building and supporting talent at Arcadia?
Yeah, so we have started investing a lot of time into just like our own type of education. You know, we're not an academic institute, but as you know, like education happens everywhere. And we have our own pedagogy that's like developing, which is like translational science, entrepreneurial science. What does that look like? And what do you have to teach? And it happens on both sides. Like for a lot of our scientists, you know, there's been a lot of basic training around like, what is equity? Like, what are the normal expectations? Like, what does it actually take to found a company, and how do people fail? Risk tolerance, all of the things that are necessary for that to happen. And in some cases, it's just like vocabulary. It can be really like scary coming in from science world and just like not know what the word valuation means, not know what like Series A is. And so we started spending a lot of time teaching that. And at the same time, we're excited to recruit in people that maybe have like started companies before in other spaces and teaching them some basics around science, like evolution 101 or intro to GitHub, like things that like help them develop some shared language and fluency in the science so that they can actually like collaborate. And so we're really excited. I mean, I think I would really like to see more scientist founders coming out of Arcadia. Having said that, that's not like the only type of founder I'm interested in. I mean, I'm just interested in like enabling opportunities for people coming from different sectors so that we have like different types of leadership coming into biotech, no matter what, you know, corner you're talking about. And so we've even started doing these like fun exercises internally that we call like communication experiments, where it's actually not that hard to talk. Financing is very similar, whether you're talking about a grant or, you know, an investor. Like basically they're looking for different things. There are different types of returns, different types of signals, different, you know. And so we've started like forcing like two people coming from totally different directions to like present something. For example, you know, having, you know, one of our like microscopy scientists present to all of the company on like what does it mean to vest in shares, and what are the different models for that, and whether it's a company or a venture creation studio or like as a VC, what are like all the ways in which profits are shared. And that was like a really fun thing to like hear her explain it in her own words and start like breaking down some of these walls that like we're not really talking about very difficult concepts. We also had like a neuroscientist present on like phylogenetic trees, like in evolution. And even within our science realm, there's like real siloed disciplines and like vocabulary. And so we're starting to like force people to do things that are a little bit uncomfortable. Becky, you might be interested to know that one of our former colleagues, Dave Metz, who's a geneticist and like a classic geneticist, he's about to like give a presentation like product, like user-centric product design. And it's like, it's really comical to hear him like talk about it. But I think like these are the things that are going to help us like cross these barriers to work on things together.
There's no way, there's no better way to learn something than to have to teach it. So I love that idea.
Exactly. We joke a lot about like, oh God, we're as a bunch of academics, like there's so much that we're bad at, but like one thing we are good at is learning and teaching. We can do that.
Absolutely.
So Seemay, you've led this exciting frontier that launched in 2021, raised $500 million for this incredibly ambitious and exciting new approach to innovation institutes. And as you've said, there's been a lot of progress in the last couple of years. So maybe taking a step back, we'd love to ask, what have been some of the greatest challenges you've faced at Arcadia so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the greatest challenges of like trying to build something new is that you should just go ahead and expect everything you do in your first year to like not pan out, because everything you do in your first year is like as close as possible to what you already experienced previously. So I think a challenge is like trying to make sure you don't revert to the means and kind of repeat exactly what you did before. Having said that, you don't want to do things different just to be different. So I think, yeah, I would say like that's been the hardest thing. It's just like trying things, shutting them down, iterating, trying something else. And it's hard, I think, on the scale of like just all the people on the team. Like that's a pretty like mentally challenging thing to go through psychologically for like a team of people to be so great in like one realm. You know, a lot of us came from academia, had no issues with our careers there, and now we're like thrown into this like self-inflicted wound of like trying different things and being really bad at it and trying to keep morale high while we're doing that and keeping people's eye on the target of like, we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, which is like trying new things and iterating from there. And so that's been hard. I mean, I think the other thing that's of course hard is just like blocking out the noise. Like, you know, there's a lot happening in this moment. You know, when we started, there was like a bunch of new institutes and companies that like started at once and everybody was like talking about it. And now it's like AI, there's always something, right? And like, I think just like staying the course and thinking about what we're trying to build and not getting too distracted by that, I think is really important. And so I would say like those have been maybe the most uniquely challenging parts of trying to do something different. And then, of course, like things that are not different, like scaling an organization from like 0 to 50 people is, as you know, like very difficult. Being a CEO of something at this scale for the first time was very difficult. And so, yeah, just basics of setting up a company, you know.
And maybe I'll ask the flip side of Chris's question, which is, what are some of your greatest accomplishments over the last 2 years, or what are you most proud of?
Yeah. I guess it is what I said, that like we sort of stuck to our guns and the people that we recruited really stuck to that. I think that the science is like, yeah, the thing that I'm most excited about. I have like more conviction about what we're doing than I did 10 years ago. And I'm like more enthusiastic about the scientific directions we're going in than ever before. And the science, what's been really amazing to me, which I didn't expect, and maybe I should have, is like how fast the science is going. I sort of like guessed, you know, there's like friction and, you know, where I was coming from, the system I was coming from in academia to do the sort of translational science that we wanted to do. But I didn't realize how much of our time goes to thinking about things like suboptimally or thinking about optimizing for grants, even though we think we're optimizing for the actual goal. There's just so much friction. And here it's like, being released from that, things are happening more than like twice as fast, as like 10 times as fast as before. Like if you look at the volume of publications we put out, it's like kind of insane how much we've achieved in just 2 years. So I'm super, super proud of that. And it's really invigorating. And I'm excited by also the talent that we're recruiting. And just also, I should say, like how helpful everybody has been. Like everybody in the venture space has just been extremely, extremely supportive. And that's made it like a really positive experience and really fun, that like no matter what happens, I feel like we learned a lot here and people are curious and watching, and someone will take some of our lessons with them, which is like the entire goal.
As we
The
think
biotech
about
ecosystem is a super, say that again. The biotech ecosystem is a super special community of people, I think, that are ultimately, we all want each other to win and we want science to be advanced. So I think it's a special community to be a part of.
It really is awesome. I mean, I've been thinking recently, like, I don't know why that wasn't like more visible to me before. But it's so true. It's like very, very positive and supportive. I think, I don't know, maybe we just don't make as much of a fuss out of it or something. But yeah, I didn't realize that previously.
it's one of the great things about going into the life sciences and into healthcare. At least I like to think that the majority of people who do so are trying to help people. And when you have that sort of positive goal and mission, that becomes hopefully a little more collaborative and supportive. But as we think about those successes, those challenges, your next steps, we've talked a lot about Arcadia to date. Would love to project out into the future and ask what's coming next.
Yeah, well, it's sort of hard to think beyond like immediately what's next. I mean, what's next is us like proving our point actually by doing, which is like we actually need to build companies and get them out the door. So that's like a pretty big, mountain of work ahead of us, to put something behind what we're saying. And then I think like beyond that though, in terms of like, if you're asking sort of like technically, what do we see happening with our platform? Oh man, I have a hard time thinking about the future beyond like a few years, but I do think like more and more of our work is going to be geared towards increasing like predictive capacity, and having like sort of a hub and spoke model where we can like build out those predictive tools, those AI tools, and have like startups that are like the sort of things that we refine that against, having like an actual sort of like blade to the tool to like sharpen. And so that's, I think, what's ahead of us. And I don't know, like, what do you think is ahead I'm curious to hear y'all project a little bit. Like, what do you imagine the future of biotech in like 5 to 10 years?
Oh, it's such a good question. I mean, I think your the word that you used there that I liked was predictive. I think everything is becoming more predictive, and a large part of that is based on the fact that we're generating data in a higher volume and higher quality than we've ever been able to before. And that combined with the computational capabilities that are really coming at an intersection, a perfect storm of timing, I think is going to change the predictive capabilities up across the spectrum. So from our ability to understand biology at the organismal level, to our ability to understand how to interject that biology with tools, with things that actually end up becoming drugs, to our ability to better design clinical trials such that we're selecting the right patients and we're actually increasing our chances of clinical success, to our ability to ultimately be able to distribute those drugs in a better way, in a more predictive fashion, and ultimately make them more affordable and reach larger swaths of the world's population. And so I think all of that is really leveraging the intersection that we're at today with bigger data, better data, and computational capabilities, along with really a world who is hungering for better healthcare, for better lifestyles, for not only living longer, but ultimately a longer health span and not just a longer lifespan. And so I think we're at a really exciting intersection right now.
One of the things that makes me excited about that future is that the more predictive we can be, I think the more sort of intentional we can be about connecting all of the dots across the scientific ecosystem, from like basic to applied. Because right now it kind of feels like, oh, we do a bunch of like basic science, and who knows, some of it might be useful for the outcome we want, translationally. But maybe one day we'll say, actually, we do know, and that can like inform on like what we work on in basic science, and it doesn't have to be quite so serendipitous. That would be my hope.
Yeah, I also hope, I think what's exciting, again, back to like the long time frame that you have, is I think there's so much data that we generate over time that, as you said, never gets leveraged for future decision making and future predictive capabilities. And I think if you build an organization from day zero with the intention of leveraging every single piece of data that you generate, and you're generating data across a wide variety of different types of organisms and different questions and different disease states, we have no ability today to be able to even think of how valuable that will be for predictive capabilities in the future. But if you don't build it that way from day zero, you're never going to be able to leverage it.
Totally. And you have to build it in a standardized way. Like we're always going to collect it this way across everything we do, right?
Being one of the leaders in academic innovation and translation today, as you think about giving advice back to those in academia who might have an interest in entrepreneurship and have an interest in translation, maybe one way you can phrase this is, what would the advice be that you would go back and give to your 20-year-old self after your experiences today and with Arcadia?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advice I would give my 20-year-old self is basically to really embrace exactly all the qualities that I was like kind of embarrassed about at the time that I was trying to like hide. And the quality I'm referring to is I do think of myself as someone who's able to sort of like survey a lot of different fields and think broadly across disciplines. I'm never like the best person at something, but I know a little bit. I'm like a jack of all trades about a lot of different things. And that is a whole different skill set to be able to like move around nimbly between different areas to like pursue ideas however you want. And so, yeah, in grad school for a while, I was in genetics, and then I switched to crystallography. And as I mentioned, like before to y'all, you know, I was basically like the worst geneticist in the room, the worst crystallographer in the room. But like the fact that I could do both was the thing. And I've continued to like build on that toolkit, being like, okay, at a lot of different things. And I've just realized like being a generalist in the world is like a huge superpower. It's very different. Being a specialist is a huge superpower too, but we really don't like celebrate being a generalist nearly enough. And that to me is like something that's really critical to people who want to found companies and pursue new ideas, because you have to be able to move very freely between different ideas, shut things down, start a new one. And that's not a thing that's like super easy for someone who's a specialist. So yeah, I would just say like fully own that and just like lean all the way into that. I think I eventually did, but you know, there's some like sort of like self-criticism happening all along the way, where the whole experience could have been a lot more joyful, you know.
I couldn't agree more. Have you ever read the book by David Epstein called Range?
You gave it to me.
Did I give it to you? Okay, I love that book.
Yes.
It's about my generalist triumph in a specialized world, and I absolutely adore it. So couldn't agree more.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that really does tie into, you know, the vision I have for Arcadia is like, I want us as an organization to be generalist. I want every scientist here to have some understanding of the different fields that they're like intersecting with. And that's going to be our power, not going super, super deep, but like surveying more of biology and more biological scales.
As we think a little bit more about who people are, I know we've talked about a lot of professional things today. Would love to ask maybe something personal and give the audience a chance to get to know you, Seemay, and just say, what do you like to do for fun?
I might have to reach a little further back than the last 2 years. I feel like if you ask any founder, what do you like to do for fun? I mean, it's build a company. There's not a lot of free time. But I don't know, like, I think even my generalist like nature is probably even reflected in what I like to do for fun. I've like jumped around to like so many different hobbies. I'm also like not good at any one hobby. You know, I've like tinkered with like surfing, tinkered with cycling, fishing. I get like really into something for a while and then I move on to the next thing. So that's kind of consistent even in my like personal life.
So I will have to interject there and say Seemay is an absolutely amazing cook, and I have benefited from that many, many, many times. So that is something that I think that you are actually very good at and seem to enjoy.
Yeah. Becky's awesome to have as someone to cook for because she's just like happy with anything you give her.
Well, I love seeing the byplay, but before we come to a close, any additional thoughts, shameless plugs, anything we might have missed, Seemay, that you might want to cover, or Becky, you yourself as well?
No, thank you for having us today, Chris. This was incredibly fun. I got to even learn some new things about someone who I've known for a long time.
I
All right.
guess like just a small shameless plug is just to check out our research. You can see all of our like pubs on our website, and that'll give you a good sense of what we're doing, including a lot of the stuff that we're not doing anymore that we would love others to take on. And we have had some people take on some projects from the outside. So we also have a bunch of job ads out for people who want to help us build. We're really doing a big push over the next 9 months to expand our whole like venture creation studio. So a lot of roles are going to be coming up in the next 9 months.
Love that focus on collaboration and team building to cap things off. Thank you, Seemay and Becky, for an absolutely fantastic episode. Very grateful for your time to learn a little bit more about you, about Arcadia. Thank you again.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.